and welcome back. Egypt's Sinai Peninsula lies between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. It's one of the Bible's most historically linked areas in the Middle East and has seen plenty of conflict down through the ages. The Sinai Peninsula is also where New Zealand Defence Force personnel have been in a peacekeeping role for more than 30 years as part of the Multinational Force and Observers unit. The story of New Zealand's role in the MFO has been documented in the book Sinai Journal, released earlier this year. And to find out more about our involvement in that region, I spoke earlier via Skype with Kiwi Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Brown. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Brown, thank you so much for being available to talk with us today. I know it's very early in the morning for you and we appreciate it. Whereabouts on the Sinai Peninsula are you Skyping from?
Sure. Well, I'm at North Camp, which is the operational headquarters of the Multinational Force and Observers. And if you imagine the Sinai Peninsula with the Suez Canal on the western side and the border with Israel on the east, we're up in the northern part of that, very close to a town called El Arish. Which is quite close to the Mediterranean Sea or the southern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and we're about 38 kilometres from El Arish at a town called El Gora, and it's the site of a former Israeli Air Force base, which was taken over by the force when the force came into being 31 years ago, and that's the main headquarters for the Multinational Force and Observers. We have a smaller base in the south of the Sinai Peninsula, but this is our main base.
Can you tell us about the role of the MFO in that region and why the Kiwis are there?
Yeah, so the mission of the force is to observe, report, and verify the arrangements that were put in place under the Treaty of Peace that stemmed from the Camp David Accords that effectively instigated the Multinational Force and Observers 31 years ago. And New Zealand's been involved right from the very start. And it's an important, very important part of our engagement in the region and our assistance, to Middle East peace and security. But we have three primary capability bricks that we provide to the force. The first is a heavy transport section. So those are professional drivers that go out on resupply runs right throughout the area of operations. We also have the New Zealand Training and Advisory Team, which does a lot of training for the force, so continuation training for the force, specialist training for the force. And then the other main group is headquarters staff officers and senior NCOs who augment the force headquarters in a variety of capacities. The force was put together by the United States as the main negotiator with Egypt and Israel, and the driver for that was that there was a feeling between Egypt and Israel that period of almost constant conflict from 1948 through 1967 to 1973 was just unsustainable and not good for either of those countries. There was a feeling that region needed, and certainly in the Sinai Peninsula itself, it needed a steadying influence, and that influence, I think, was most keenly felt by both parties, and they both felt that there was a need to have an independent and impartial force interposed between them, and it has proven to be strategically very important in the last 31 years. And it has evolved. The force isn't today what it was 31 years ago. I think it's a very robust force. It's a very modest force of 2,500 people, but it serves a very important political and strategic benefit to those two nations. And the Sinai region, and certainly the northern Sinai region, is a very difficult and challenged part of Egypt. It is, of course, part of we are in Egypt itself, and certainly there's a range of challenges and stressors that exist in this part of the world and on this essentially this zone between Egypt and Israel, and part of that is our proximity to Gaza, and part of that is the indigenous people that live in this region. They don't necessarily live in the Sinai Peninsula or in Egypt or in Israel. They traverse, right around this region, and some of those groups are undertaking a range of activities that wouldn't necessarily be constructive to peace and security in this part of the Middle East. But the challenges are definitely surmountable. They just present problems to us that need to be addressed and resolved as best we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. How do you adjust to somewhere that's so different from home?
This is my fifth mission, and I in many ways, it's more isolated than the others. I've served in Afghanistan, Solomon Islands, East Timor, Bosnia-Herzegovina in the course of my career, but it's a very isolated place. To get here from Cairo is about an 8-hour drive. It is, and it's a very isolated place, and I think the challenges of missing family and friends, I think, is always uppermost in people's minds, even though we do, and the soldiers and sailors and airmen on the contingent do a wonderful job. There is that overlaying feeling of isolation, and my impression is that it is quite an isolated mission.
Yeah, that's been quite evident in the book, the Sinai Journal, which we have here, and that marks the 30th anniversary of the MFO in Sinai. And so it's been great to learn more about New Zealand's role in that region, which actually goes back a long way before the official MFO was formed. Isn't that right? Almost 100 years before?
Well, one of the things I was going to say is that the anniversary of the MFO is also Anzac Day. So there's a nice symmetry between what we celebrate nationally on the 25th of April and also what the MFO celebrate. But we have been in this part of the world for a long, long time. I mean, I'm always mindful of the fact that the Gallipoli landings were staged out of Alexandria, just north of Cairo, and the main hospital facilities for the landings and subsequent operations were in Alexandria and Cairo as well. So it's a region that we have a lot of history in. And you'd be aware, of course, in the Second World War, we had a main base in Cairo and operated out of here extensively as well. So, we have had a long, long history in this part of the world, going back to the Second World War. And you don't have to go far to find, a commemoration or a plaque or something that has some significance to New Zealanders.
Kiwi Commanding Officer Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Brown was talking to me there from his base on the Sinai Peninsula, where he's serving with the Multinational Force and Observers. And unfortunately, we had to finish our conversation at that point as we lost our Skype connection. But we are grateful to the New Zealand Defence Force for facilitating that interview for us. The book we were talking about during that interview is the Sinai Journal, which documents 30 years of Kiwis serving with the multinational force in that region. And you can find out more details on the New Zealand Defence Force website, which is nzdf.mil.nz. Again, that web address is nzdf.mil.nz. Well, still to come, she's only 11 years old, but she's already living her dream. We meet one of New Zealand's rising young stars next.